Welcome, dear viewers, to Go to Sleep Historian. Tonight, I invite you to close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let your mind drift far away from the noise of the modern world. Together, we will journey back in time, to a medieval English villager place of thatched cottages, winding lanes, and fields that stretch beneath the open sky. Over the course of this story, told gently in 16 chapters, we will walk with the villagers from dawn until nightfall. We will see how they lived, how they worked, how they celebrated, and how they endured hardship. In their world of faith, community, and simplicity, there is much to discover and much to soothe the restless heart. So settle into comfort, let the sound of the words carry you, and allow history to become a gentle lullaby. And before we begin, I kindly ask, if you enjoy this journey, please subscribe to Go to Sleep Historian. Your support allows me to bring more calming stories of the past for your nights of rest. Now, let us step softly into the medieval village. The story begins at dawn. Dawn in the village, the air is cool, and the land is still wrapped in shadows. It is early morning in medieval England, sometime in the 13th century. The sun has not yet risen above the rolling hills, but already the faintest gray light begins to push away the night. A rooster crows, his call echoing across the quiet fields, signaling the beginning of another day. For the villagers who live here, the dawn is not a gentle luxury to be admired from a window. It is the signal of duty, the first reminder that the day's labor waits. Picture the village as it lies before us, small and self-contained. It sits in a wide, fertile valley, cradled by hedgerows and woods. Around it stretched the great open fields, divided into long strips of plowed earth where barley, oats, and wheat grow in season. Beyond them lie meadows for grazing, and the dark forest, where villagers may gather firewood, nuts, and wild berries, though always with care. For the forest belongs to the Lord, and trespass is risky. At the heart of the village rises a simple stone church, its bell ready to call the faithful to prayer. Close by is the manor house, larger than the cottages but still modest compared to castles elsewhere in the land. And clustered around the village green stand, the homes of peasants, humble in their construction but alive with the warmth of families. Inside one such cottage, we hear the stirrings of the household. The dwelling is small, just a single room with low walls, made of wattle and daub, the wooden frame packed with clay and straw. Its thatched roof is thick, keeping in warmth, but also the smell of smoke from the open hearth. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof through which the smoke slowly drifts, curling in the cold air. The floor is earth, packed hard by years of feet, though it is covered here and there with rushes to soften the ground. The family stirs together on their bedding of straw, which has grown flattened and rough from long use. They rise early, for the village wakes with the dawn. The father, weary from yesterday's work, stands first, pulling on a rough woolen tunic and fastening a leather belt around his waist. His hands are already calloused, blackened beneath the nails from the soil. He lifts a cloak from a peg, for mornings are often chilly, even in summer. His wife soon follows, her linen shift tied with a cord at the waist, her hair covered with a simple veil. She will spend much of the day at hearth and garden, keeping the family fed. The children, younger and still blinking with sleep, are nudged awake. Some are hardly more than toddlers, others already old enough to fetch water or help scatter grain for the chickens. Childhood is short here, for by the age of 7 or 8, a child is expected to share in the daily labors of the household. Yet in these first moments of morning, they stretch and whisper, reluctant to leave their bedding. The fire, banked low overnight beneath a heap of ash, is carefully stirred back to life. Sparks leap as dry kindling is added, then small sticks, and soon the hearth glows again, its orange light dancing across the dark room. A pot of thin pottage, left from the day before, is warmed for breakfast. It is little more than oats boiled with a few vegetables, but it provides enough to start the day. The family eats from wooden bowls, using spoons carved from horn or wood. There is no sense of ceremony. Food is fuel, and fuel is precious. Outside, the village begins to hum with life. Neighbors call softly to one another as they step from their cottages. Chickens cluck restlessly, waiting to be fed, while a tethered pig snorts in the straw. A cow lows in the byre, ready to be milked. Dogs bark, small mongrels that serve as guards as well as companions. The morning air smells of wood smoke, of damp earth, of manure and hay. It is not unpleasant to those who live here, but a familiar, constant scent of survival. The village lanes are narrow, nothing more than packed dirt worn smooth by feet and cartwheels. In spring they are muddy, in summer dusty, in winter often frozen and rutted. Yet they are the arteries of the community, leading villagers to the fields, the church, and the manor. As the sun finally edges above the horizon, its light catches on the thatched roofs, turning them golden. Birds sing in the hedges, and the day truly begins. Soon the church bell tolls, its sound carrying over the cottages and fields. The villagers pause in their tasks, for the rhythm of life here is marked not by clocks, but by the church. The bell is both a call to prayer and a measure of time. For those bound by faith, it is also reassurance that whatever hardships the day brings, the village is held together beneath the watch of God. But religion alone cannot fill the belly, and work presses in. Men gather their tools, wooden plows, hoes, and scythes ready to tend the Lord's fields. Women draw water from the well, balancing heavy buckets with practiced ease. Some children are sent to chase birds from the barley, while others follow their mothers, clutching small baskets. Life here is communal, every villager tied by obligation not only to their families but to the manor and the fields. As the villagers set off for their tasks, the sun climbs higher, bringing with it warmth and light. But even with the promise of day, there is no illusion of ease. Life in the medieval English village is hard. It is shaped by toil, by hunger, by obedience to the seasons and the soil. Yet there is also constancy, a rhythm as familiar as the sunrise. Each dawn feels much like the one before, and the one that will follow. Now imagine walking along one of the narrow lanes as the morning unfolds. You see the fields stretching wide, divided into long strips of tilled earth. These strips are not owned by individuals in the way we understand property today, but are shared under the system of the open field. Each family has rights to cultivate certain strips, but they must work together, sowing and harvesting in common. The soil is life itself, and it binds the villagers in a web of interdependence. Along the edges of the fields, hedgerows hum with bees, and wildflowers nod in the breeze. In the distance, a farmer drives his oxen, their hooves sinking into the damp ground as they pull the heavy plow. Another scatters seed by hand, a wide arc with each swing of his arm. Behind him, crows wheel and cry, waiting for the chance to snatch the grain. The women, too, are busy. They tend kitchen gardens, where cabbages, leeks, and onions grow, pulling weeds and checking for pests. They milk the cow, churn butter, or brew ale, a task as common as baking bread. The children, though often at play, are also woven into this fabric of labor, carrying water, gathering sticks, or tending the animals. There is no idleness here. Every hand, no matter how small, is needed. And so the morning wears on, the village alive with effort, the voices of men calling to their oxen, the creak of wooden wheels, the soft cluck of hens in the yard all blend into a chorus of survival. Yet beneath it all, there is also peace. The villagers know their world, and they know their place within it. Dawn brings labor, yes, but also a sense of belonging, of continuity stretching back through generations. By mid-morning, the sun is high enough to warm the cottages, and the day is well begun. The villagers will labor until the bell calls them to pause, to pray, and to eat. But for now, they are immersed in the work that sustains them. This is dawn in a medieval English village, quiet, ordinary, and yet profoundly alive. Village itself, the sun has now lifted fully above the horizon, bathing the countryside in a soft golden light. Morning mist lingers in the meadows, clinging low to the grass, while the fields gleam with dew. The medieval English village slowly reveals itself in this light, every detail sharpened, the outlines of the cottages, the crooked paths, the distant steeple of the church. To understand the life of its people, we must first understand the village itself, the very bones and frame upon which their daily existence rests. A medieval English village is not large, and yet within its boundaries are contained all the essentials of life: home, work, faith, and community. Each piece of land, each building, has its purpose, and together they form a whole, a living organism that pulses with the rhythm of seasons and toil. Imagine standing on a small rise above the village, looking down at it as a bird might. At the center, like the heart of the community, lies the church. Its tower, though simple, is the tallest structure in sight, built of rough local stone. It is small compared to the grand cathedrals rising in distant cities, yet it commands respect. Its bells measure time, its walls guard the sacred mysteries, and its yard holds the graves of generations of villagers. Around the church is a cluster of cottages, modest homes pressed close together, their thatched roofs leaning at odd angles, their walls patched where storms have torn them. The cottages form no perfect grid. They follow the shape of the land, curved lanes winding between them. The ground is worn by countless feet, dirt packed hard in some places, muddied in others. Chickens dart across the paths, children chase one another, and dogs lounge in doorways, watchful. Smoke rises from chimneys and hearth-holes, marking the beginning of another day's tasks. Beyond the cottages lies the village green, a rough patch of grass, where animals graze, where villagers sometimes gather, and where fairs or festivals are held. Here, geese may be seen waddling noisily, and tethered cattle swish their tails at flies. It is both a common pasture and a meeting place, the open space around which village life revolves. A short walk away, usually to one side of the settlement, stands the manor house, seat of the local lord. It is not a castle with towers and battlements, though travelers' tales may speak of such places. Here, the manor is a solid timber hall, perhaps with a stone foundation, larger and sturdier than the cottages, but still plain compared to noble houses of greater wealth. Its size alone sets it apart, reminding villagers of their obligations and their place in the feudal order. Within those walls, the lord or his steward oversees the land, collects rents and dues, and presides over the manor court where disputes are settled. The villagers may not enter often, but the manor's shadow looms over their daily lives. Spread outward from this core are the great open fields, stretching in strips across the land. These are the heart of the village's survival. The open field system divides the land into long, narrow strips cultivated by each family. No hedges or fences mark them, only memory and custom define where one family's portion ends and another begins. At first glance it seems chaotic, yet it is an orderly system, one that binds the villagers in cooperation. They plow together, sow together, harvest together, for the survival of one depends upon the labor of all. At the edges of the fields lie the meadows, green and lush, where hay is cut to feed animals through the winter. Beyond these meadows stretch the common lands pasture for sheep, woods for gathering firewood, streams for fishing. Each villager has rights here, though always regulated by the Lord's permission. The balance between necessity and restriction is delicate. Gather too much wood, and punishment follows. Fish without leave, and fines are levied. Yet still the common land offers relief, a place where the poorest may forage and find sustenance. Walking through the village, you would see the cottages up close, each one humble but alive with signs of life. They are made from wattle and daub, their walls a mixture of clay, straw, and dung pressed into wooden frames. The roofs are thick with thatch, golden when new but darkened by smoke and weather over time. The doors are simple wood, often low, so a man must duck his head to enter. Windows are few, small, sometimes covered only by oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Inside, light is dim, smoke clings to the rafters, and the air smells of hearth fires, livestock, and humanity. Beside each cottage lies a small yard or toft, fenced roughly with woven branches. Here chickens scratch in the dirt, pigs root in the straw, and perhaps a goat or cow is tethered. A few tools lean against the wall: rakes, spades, wooden carts with squeaking wheels. A kitchen garden grows nearby, neat rows of onions, beans, and leeks, alongside herbs for flavor and medicine. Every scrap of space is used, for food is precious and nothing is wasted. In the lanes between houses, life bustles. Women carry buckets from the village well, balancing them on wooden yokes across their shoulders. Children chase geese, their laughter mingling with the squawking. A blacksmith hammers at his forge, the ring of iron echoing through the air. The smell of baking bread drifts from the communal oven, where women gather to bake loaves for their families. The soundscape of the village is rich, not loud, but full. The murmur of voices, the clatter of tools, the lowing of cattle, the crowing of roosters. Yet for all its life, the village is also fragile. A bad harvest, a fire, or a raid can bring ruin. Its wooden homes are vulnerable, its people tied tightly to the soil. Few have traveled far, and fewer still have seen the bustling cities or the distant sea. For most, the village is the whole world, its boundaries rarely crossed except for market days or pilgrimages. Still, within these bounds there is a sense of belonging. Each villager knows the paths by heart. The lane to the well, the track to the fields, the shortcut through the meadows. They know each neighbor by name, their kinship ties stretching back generations. The rhythm of life is communal, each family reliant on others. If a roof collapses, neighbors help rebuild. If a child is sick, a wise woman is summoned. If a cow strays, someone returns it. Though life is hard, it is shared, and that sharing brings strength. Now, as the sun climbs higher, the village settles into its daily pattern. Men stride toward the fields, women to their tasks, children scattered to chores or play. The church bell tolls again, reminding all of their duty not only to the land, but to God. The village, though small, is a universe unto itself, a place where faith, work, and community are interwoven. And so, the medieval English village stands as both shelter and taskmaster. It provides the framework for survival, yet demands labor in return. Its cottages and lanes, its fields and commons, all speak of a life bound to the soil, bound to neighbors, bound to the rhythms of sun and season. This is the village itself, not merely a cluster of houses, but the very shape of existence for those who call it home. The people of village. When we look at a medieval English village, we see its cottages, its fields, its church and manor. But the true heart of the village lies not in timber or stone, but in its people. The men, women, and children who rise with the sun, who labor through the day, who share hardships and joys alike. They are the life of this place. To understand the village, we must meet its people. The population of such a village is not large. Perhaps 100, maybe 200 souls live here, bound together by the soil. Everyone knows one another, for better or worse. Secrets are difficult to keep in such a close-knit place. Every birth, every marriage, every quarrel is a matter of common knowledge. Families are woven into the fabric of the village by blood, by marriage, and by obligation. At the broadest level, the people of the village fall into certain groups, each with their place in the order of feudal society. At the top stands the lord of the manor, though he is often absent, residing in larger towns or at another estate. His presence is felt, however, through his steward or bailiff, who oversees the land, collects dues, and ensures the villagers meet their obligations. The lord represents authority, power, and ownership. To the villagers, he is both protector and master. Below him are the free men. These are villagers who hold land in their own right, not bound by serfdom, though they still owe certain rents and duties. They are relatively few in number, and their independence is a mark of respect. A freeman may trade, travel, and make choices denied to others. He may hire laborers or pass his land to his heirs with fewer restrictions. Yet even a freeman is not entirely free, for all land ultimately belongs to the Lord, and loyalty is still required. Most of the villagers are peasant serfs and villains bound to the land and the manor. They cannot leave without permission, cannot marry freely, and owe a portion of their labor to the Lord's fields. In return, they are allowed to work strips of land to feed their families. Though bound, they are not slaves. They have rights within the manor, and their labor is essential. Without them, the fields would go unplowed, the harvest uncollected, the manor unprosperous. Among them are cotters and boarders, who hold only small plots of land, or perhaps none at all, relying instead on day labor or craft. Their lives are precarious, yet they too are part of the village's fabric. At the very bottom are the landless poor, those who beg for alms or serve in households, surviving on what little charity can be spared. But beyond these categories, the villagers are individuals, each with a role to play in the community. Let us walk among them as they begin their day. Here is a plowman, his shoulders broad from years of labor, his tunic stained with earth. He leads his oxen into the fields, calling to them in a low voice, guiding the wooden plow through the soil. His hands are cracked, his face weathered by sun and wind, yet his strength is the foundation of the village's survival. Without his labor, the seed would not take root, the harvest would not come. Beside him, his wife tends their small yard. She scatters grain for the chickens, lifts a pail of water from the well, and sets a pot over the fire to cook the morning's meal. Her day is no less demanding. She will churn butter, spin wool, mend clothes, tend the garden, and care for the children, all while managing the household's food and fire. The survival of her family depends on her constant effort. Children cluster around her, some still small, others already old enough to work. A boy of 8 may be sent to the fields to scare birds from the crops, waving his arms and shouting to keep them away. A girl of 10 may carry wood for the hearth or help her mother spin flax into thread. Their lives are short of play, though not without it. Yet the path from childhood to adulthood is swift. By their early teens, they are already workers, apprentices, or servants. Elsewhere in the village we find craftsmen, whose skills, though humble, are vital. A blacksmith hammers at his forge, shaping iron nails, hinges, and tools. His work fills the air with sparks and ringing sound, his arms strong from years at the anvil. The carpenter shapes timber into carts and plows, repairing the thatched roofs when storms tear them. The miller oversees the grinding of grain, his hands dusted with flour, his mill wheel turning steadily with the current of the stream. Each craft ties the village together, each man or woman contributing to the whole. We pass a shepherd, his flock grazing in the meadow. He walks with a crook in his hand, a dog at his side, guiding the sheep with whistles and calls. His life is spent in the open air, through sun and storm alike. The shepherd's wool will clothe the village, his sheep's milk and meat feed them, his vigilance protect them from wolves or thieves. Then there is the reeve, chosen from among the peasants to oversee the work of the fields, to ensure the Lord's interests are served. He is a man caught between two worlds, both neighbor and overseer, bound to his fellow villagers, but entrusted with authority. His task is not easy, for fairness and suspicion often clash in his role. In the manor house, the steward or bailiff records dues and rents, keeps track of obligations, and manages the manor's affairs. He may be stern, disliked for his enforcement of the Lord's rights, but he is necessary in the order of things. His presence reminds all that the village does not exist for itself alone, but as part of a greater hierarchy stretching upward to king and crown. And always there is the priest. He is not of the villagers, but neither is he distant. He serves the souls of the people, offering the Mass, hearing confessions, baptizing children, burying the dead. His church is the heart of the village, its tower visible from every field. His voice calls them to prayer, his words offer comfort. His authority reminds them of the eternal order that lies beyond the temporal one. He, too, is part of this community, living among them, sustained by their tithes, yet set apart by his sacred calling. The people of the village are not equal in wealth or freedom, but they are equal in vulnerability. A bad harvest threatens lord and peasant alike. Though the burden falls heaviest on the poor, disease respects no rank, famine no boundary. In such hardships, the villagers rely on one another, for though divided by rank, they are bound by shared survival. In times of joy, too, the village gathers as one. At festivals, men and women dance together, children laugh, and the priest blesses the season's bounty. At weddings, the whole community celebrates. For a marriage is not just a union of two souls, but of families, of land, of obligations. At funerals, the villagers walk together to the churchyard, carrying their dead to rest among the ancestors. In sorrow and celebration alike, the people are one. Yet life is not without conflict. Quarrels over land, disputes over inheritance, accusations of theft, such matters arise, and they are brought before the manor court. Here the villagers themselves, under the Lord's authority, judge and decide. Justice may be rough, punishments severe, but it is also communal, shaped by the people's sense of right and wrong. So who are the people of the medieval village? They are laborers and craftsmen, women and men, children and elders. They are bound by the land, by the manor, by the church, and by each other. Their lives are marked by hardship, yet also by resilience. They know hunger, but also laughter, toil, but also rest. They live within narrow bounds, but within those bounds lies a world rich with meaning. To stand among them is to see not faceless peasants, but individuals. A mother's weary smile as she stirs the pot, a child's laughter as he runs barefoot through the grass, a blacksmith's concentration as he strikes iron, a shepherd's whistle carrying across the meadow. The medieval village is not just fields and cottages, it is these people, their labor, their faith, their endurance, and as the day unfolds, we begin to see them not as distant figures of history, but as men and women whose hopes and struggles are not so different from our own. They long for food, for shelter, for family, for peace. They endure loss, they celebrate life, they fear death, and they cling to faith. The centuries between us grow thin, and the people of the village step into the light. A peasant's home step closer now, and we leave the wide sweep of the fields, the bustle of the village green, and the solemn shadow of the church. We pass through the crooked lane, where chickens scatter before our feet, and stop before one of the cottages. Here, within these modest walls, lies the heart of peasant life. The home, small, smoky, and humble, was more than a shelter from the weather. It was a place of warmth and family, of labor and survival, of laughter and sorrow. To understand a villager's world, we must first step inside his home. From the outside, the cottage is unassuming. Its walls are built of wattle and daba, frame of wooden posts, and woven branches plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, and manure. The roof is thatched, a thick layer of dried reeds laid carefully to shed rain and hold in warmth. It is not neat nor uniform, but patched where storms have torn at it, replaced where rot has set in. The doorway is low, so low that a grown man must stoop to enter. The door itself is a rough wooden plank, hung with simple iron hinges, perhaps secured by a wooden latch. Windows are scarce, often little more than small openings covered with shutters or oiled cloth. Glass is far too expensive for a peasant to imagine. Step through the door, and the first thing that strikes you is the dimness. Even on a bright morning, the inside of the cottage is shadowed, the only true light coming from the doorway and the open hearth. The air is thick with smoke, for there is no chimney. The fire burns in a simple pit or hearth at the center, or along one wall, and its smoke drifts upward to seep through the thatch. At times, it lingers, stinging the eyes, coating the beams with soot. The smell of smoke never leaves, clinging to clothes, to hair, to every rush laid on the floor. The floor itself is not of stone or wood, but packed earth, hardened over years of footsteps. In wealthier cottages, fresh reeds or rushes are strewn across it, sometimes sprinkled with herbs to sweeten the air. In poorer homes, the earth lies bare, swept as best it can be. Around the hearth, the earth is blackened from ash, scattered with bits of charcoal. The fire is both kitchen and warmth, the center of the home's life. What of furniture? There is little. A rough wooden table, perhaps fashioned by the village carpenter, its surface scarred with use. A few stools or benches, made of planks or even stumps. A chest for storing clothing or tools, its lid doubling as a seat. In many homes there are no separate rooms, only a single space where all is done. Cooking, eating, sleeping, working, and at times sheltering animals all happen here, under the same roof. Against one wall lies the bedding, a frame of wood if fortune allows, but more often, a heap of straw or rushes covered with a rough blanket or animal skins. Families sleep together, huddled close for warmth in winter. Privacy is unknown, for there are no separate chambers, no doors within doors. Life is communal, intimate, and without secrets. Parents, children, sometimes even grandparents, sleep in the same room. Near the hearth hangs the iron pot, suspended from a hook or set upon stones. It holds the daily meal, a thick pottage of oats or barley, boiled with beans, leeks, cabbage, or whatever vegetables are at hand. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days or special occasions, but now and then a bit of bacon, a scrap of rabbit, or a joint of mutton may be added. Wooden bowls and horn spoons serve for eating, and trenchers of stale bread stand in for plates. Ale brewed by the housewife is drunk from wooden cups, safer than the uncertain water. In the corner may stand a loom or a spinning wheel, for cloth is made at home as well as bought. Women spin flax into linen thread, or wool into yarn, which is then woven into rough cloth. Clothing must be patched and repatched, for garments are few and fabric is costly. A man's tunic may pass down to his son, his cloak shared between siblings when weather demands. Nothing is wasted, for nothing can be. Look carefully, and you will see the tools of daily life. A wooden rake, a spade, a sickle for cutting crops, a clay jug for ale, a wooden tub for washing, a knife, its blade worn thin, used for everything from carving meat to cutting rope. The home is spare, without ornament, yet every object speaks of work, of survival, of necessity. And often, The home is not shared by humans alone. In winter especially, the smaller animals are brought inside. A calf, a goat, or even chickens may roost at one end of the cottage, their warmth helping to fight the cold. Their presence adds to the noise, the smell, the constant reminder that life here is lived in closeness with family, with animals, with the earth itself. It may seem harsh to modern eyes, but for those who live here, this home is not merely enough, it is life itself. Within these smoky walls, families are raised, children are born, and elders take their final rest. The cottage shelters laughter as well as tears. Around the fire, stories are told, songs sung, prayers whispered. The space may be poor in possessions, but it is rich in memory, in continuity, in the bond of kinship. Not every peasant's home is alike, of course. The wealthier villain may have a slightly larger house, with 2 rooms instead of 1, a loft above for sleeping, or a separate space for animals. His furniture may be sturdier, his bedding thicker, his pots and pans more numerous. A poor cotter, by contrast, may live in a single, cramped room, with little more than straw to sleep on, and a hearth barely large enough to warm a pot. Yet whether rich or poor, all peasants share the same world of simple shelter, the same dependence on hearth and field. Beyond the physical, the home carries with it a weight of tradition. It is passed from father to son, generation to generation. A child grows up within its walls, learns to work, to eat, to pray, to endure. The cottage is both cradle and coffin, its smoky beams watching over every stage of life. Though fragile, though easily lost to fire or decay, it is also enduring, rebuilt when it falls, restored when it crumbles. Outside the door, a narrow strip of land holds the kitchen garden, a small but vital extension of the home. Here grow cabbages, beans, onions, peas, and leek-sumble crops that keep the family alive. Herbs are grown for flavor and healing: parsley, sage, thyme, and mint. A few fruit trees may stand nearby, their apples or pears precious in autumn. The garden is the woman's charge, her skill in tending it often the difference between hunger and sufficiency. The cottage yard is noisy too. Chickens scratch, a pig roots in the dirt, a dog barks at strangers. Every corner is used, every scrap of ground turned to purpose. A dung heap steams behind the house, manure collected for the fields. Wood is stacked for the hearth, though never enough to last the whole winter. Tools lean against the wall, waiting for the day's labor. The home extends beyond its walls, into yard and garden, field and lane, and what of leisure. Even here, within these narrow bounds, there is room for it. In the evenings, when the day's toil is done, the family gathers by the fire. Songs are sung, tales are told, some of saints, some of legends, some of mischief. Children play with dolls of rags or carved wooden toys. Men repair tools, women spin or sew, all while laughter or quiet talk fills the smoky air. On cold nights, when the wind howls through the thatch, the fire burns low and prayers are spoken for safety until morning. So, in this humble space, the cycle of life turns. The peasant's home is no grand hall, no castle of stone. It is small, dark, and plain. Yet within it beats the steady rhythm of survival and of love. It is here that a child takes his first steps on an earthen floor, here that bread is broken and shared, here that the weary lay down to sleep. The home may be fragile, but it is enough. It is the heart of the peasant's world. The manor and the Lord's roll step with me now from the peasant's cottage, through the winding village lanes, and onward up the slight rise of land. Here, above the cluster of homes and the open fields, stands another dwelling, the manor house, the seat of the Lord. It is not always a great stone castle with turrets and walls, as we often imagine. In many villages, the manor is simpler, a large timber-framed hall, sometimes fortified with a moat or palisade, sometimes only a sturdy house, set apart by its size and strength. Yet whether grand or modest, the manor is the symbol of authority, of order, and of the hierarchy that shapes every villager's life. For in this world of medieval England, society rests upon a delicate web of obligations. At its heart lies the lord of the manor. He may be a knight who has fought for his king, or a noble who has inherited his title, or even an abbot or bishop holding the land for the church. Whatever his origin, he is the master here. The soil itself belongs to him, the meadows and woods, the rivers and roads. The peasants who till the land are not owners but tenants, bound by duty to serve him in exchange for the right to live and work. The manor house reflects this authority. Approach it, and you notice its difference at once. Where the peasants' cottages are small and smoky, the manor rises tall, with walls of stone or timber, sometimes whitewashed so that it gleams in the sunlight. The roof may be tiled or thatched, but its size sets it apart, sprawling larger than any other dwelling. A gate may guard the entrance, and a courtyard spreads before the hall. Within, there may be barns, stables, and storehouses, for the manor is both home and administrative center. Step inside, and the contrast grows sharper still. The central room is the great hall, high-roofed and spacious, with beams of oak stretching overhead. Here, the lord and his household eat, conduct business, and receive visitors. A great hearth burns in the middle, its smoke rising to the rafters. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, stands the Lord's table, where he and his family dine apart from the servants and retainers. On the walls hang tapestries perhaps, or hunting trophies, a sign of wealth and status. Benches line the room, and trestle tables are set up for meals. At night, some of the servants may even sleep upon the floor, rolled in cloaks by the fading fire. Compared to the peasant's cottage, the manor feels almost luxurious. Meat is served here more often, bread is whiter, wine sometimes flows in place of ale. There are beds with wooden frames and mattresses stuffed with feathers or wool. The rooms may be small and drafty by our standards, yet to the villagers they seem grand indeed. The manor is a world apart, yet it governs every corner of the village below. But what is the role of this lord, this master of land and people? It is more than simply enjoying privilege. His authority carries with it responsibility. The villagers, who work his fields and pay their rents, look to him for protection, for justice, and for the maintenance of order. He may not always be kind, and some lords are harsh, but the bond between lord and peasant is one of necessity. The land cannot be farmed without the labor of the peasants. The peasants cannot live without access to the lord's land. It is a balance, sometimes uneasy, but it holds the medieval village together. The lord's power is seen most clearly in the manorial court. At intervals, the villagers gather in the hall, or sometimes in the open air, to settle disputes and hear proclamations. The steward, acting in the Lord's name, presides, and the villagers, often a group of men sworn to speak truths, serve as jurors. Here fines are given for breaking the rules of the manor, for letting pigs wander through the crops, for failing to repair hedges, for brewing poor ale. Here too, quarrels are judged, debts recorded, and agreements made. The court is not just about punishment. It is the heart of village governance, the place where law and order are woven into daily life. The obligations of the peasants toward the Lord are many. They must work his domain lands, those fields kept for the Lord's own profit, hewing, sowing, and harvesting, in their turn. They owe him labor, sometimes a few days each week, sometimes more at harvest. They owe him rents, paid in money, grain, or livestock. They must use his mill to grind their corn, his oven to bake their bread, paying fees each time. These rights are jealously guarded, for they bring the Lord steady income. Yet in return, the Lord owes them protection. Should raiders come, or lawless men threaten, the peasants turn to him for defense. Should disputes arise, they depend on his court for resolution. Not all lords live constantly in their manor. Some are absent, serving the king in war, or attending to other lands. In such cases, a steward or bailiff oversees the daily running of the estate, keeping accounts, collecting rents, and ensuring labor is done. Still, even in absence, the Lord's presence is felt in every field and cottage, a reminder of the structure upon which life depends. Around the manor house spreads the domain, the Lord's private farmland, tended by peasants but reaping profits for him. Beyond it lie the open fields worked by the villagers, divided into strips. The woods and pastures are also his, though the peasants may have rights to gather firewood or graze animals. Even the rivers and ponds belong to him, and fishing may require his leave. Nothing in the village lies outside his reach. And yet, though the Lord commands much, his life too is bound by duty. He owes service to his king, often in the form of military aid. He must maintain his household, feed his servants, and keep his estate in order. His wealth depends not upon idle riches, but upon the hard work of those beneath him. The manor, for all its seeming strength, rests upon the shoulders of the peasants in the fields. Within the walls of his hall, the Lord lives not alone, but surrounded by a household. His wife, the lady of the manor, plays her part too, managing the domestic side of life. She oversees the kitchens, the brewing, the dairies, and the spinning. She directs the maids and servants, ensuring that food is prepared, clothing mended, and stores maintained. In many ways, her role mirrors that of a peasant's wife, but on a larger scale, with many more hands to command. The manor is also a place of hospitality. Travelers, clerks, or wandering friars may find shelter here, welcomed at the Lord's table. Feast days bring banquets. When music is played, wine flows, and roasted meats are set out in abundance. On such occasions, even the villagers may share in the bounty, invited to celebrate with their Lord. These moments of festivity break the rhythm of toil, binding Lord and village together in shared tradition. Yet life in the manor is not always ease and merriment. It too knows hardship. The manor house may be drafty in winter, smoky from its hearths, dark in its corners. Food stores may run low in poor harvests, servants may quarrel, accounts may falter, and always, the threat of war or rebellion hangs at the edges of life. A lord's hall may be burned in conflict, his lands seized, his authority challenged. The manor is strong, but it is not invulnerable. Still, in times of peace, the manor stands as the center of village life. From its hall come orders and judgments. From its stores flow grain and ale. From its gates rides the mounted lord, a figure of both awe and necessity. To the peasants, it is a reminder of the structure of their world, a world where each man has his place: serf, freeman, priest, and lord, all bound in the chain of medieval society. As night falls, the manor's windows glow with firelight. Inside, the Lord dines at his table, served by his household. while the steward tallies accounts and the servants clear away dishes. Beyond the walls, the peasants return to their cottages, weary from labor but secure in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same cycle again. The manor watches over them, both burden and shield, both master and protector. Thus stands the manor, not merely a house of wealth but a cornerstone of medieval life. It is here that power is held, justice dispensed, labor commanded. It is here that the bonds of lord and tenant are woven, fragile, yet enduring. The manor is not only the home of the Lord is the heart of the village's order, the structure without which the fields could not be tilled, the cottages could not stand, and the people could not endure. The church and religion in daily life as the first light of dawn spreads across the village fields. A sound rises above the clucking of hens and the braying of oxen. It is the ringing of the church bell, echoing over rooftops, through meadows, and down winding lanes. Its voice is clear and commanding, a reminder to every soul in the village that life is not only measured in harvests and labors, but also in prayer. The church stands at the center of the village, not always physically at its heart, but always spiritually. It may be a modest stone building with a square tower, or a simple wooden chapel with a bell hung from a frame. In wealthier villages, it may boast stained glass windows that scatter colored light upon the flagstones, or a carved font at which children are baptized. But even the humblest church carries weight far beyond its size. For in this age, the church is not simply a place of worship, it is the very soul of the village. Step through the low-arched doorway, and you enter a space that is at once cool, shadowed, and solemn. The air smells of beeswax candles, of damp stone, and of incense lingering from the last holy feast. At the far end stands the altar, draped in cloth, with a crucifix above it. Around the walls, perhaps, are painted saints' faded figures of Mary, St. Peter, St. Michael, gazing down with gentle eyes. The floor beneath your feet may be of uneven stone, or packed earth-worn smooth by generations of knees and feet. This is the space where every villager, young and old, rich and poor, will kneel in prayer, seek forgiveness, and mark the great passages of life. Religion is not a part of daily life, it is daily life. Every hour, every task, every joy and sorrow, is touched by the presence of faith. The peasants, the reeve, the smith, even the Lord himself, all live in the knowledge that their lives are watched by God, their actions weighed, their destinies decided by the balance of sin and grace. Heaven and hell are not abstract ideas but vivid realities. The paintings on the church walls often show them, the blessed rising to light and music, the damned dragged by demons into fire. These images impress themselves on every child's mind, shaping their choices, their fears, their hopes. The rhythm of the week is marked by Sunday Mass. No matter how weary from labor, the villagers gather in the church on the Lord's Day. They kneel together, whispering prayers in Latin they may not understand, yet knowing the words carry power. The priest, standing before them, raises the host, and in that moment they believe Christ himself is present. For an hour, their world of toil and hardship is lifted into a realm of sacred mystery. Yet the church is not only for Sundays. Its bell calls the faithful to mark the passing hours. On feast days, the church bursts into color and song. Candles blaze, banners wave, hymns are sung. The great festivals of the year, Easter, Christmas, Pentecost, the feast of the villages, patron saint fill the church with life. On these days, peasants set aside their toil, lords open their halls, and the whole community shares in celebration. These festivals are not merely spiritual, they are moments of joy, laughter, and relief, when the hardships of existence are softened by the promise of divine grace. The church also shapes the stages of human life. At its font, infants are baptized, welcomed into the Christian family. At its altar, couples are joined in marriage, their vows spoken before priest and God. And when death comes, as it often does, sudden and early, the church bell tolls, the priest prays, and the body is laid to rest in consecrated ground. Life and death alike pass through the hands of the church, binding the people to it in ways deeper than loyalty to any lord. The priest is a central figure in this story. He may live in a small house beside the church, tending his garden, copying his accounts, visiting the sick. His learning sets him apart from most of his flock, for he can read and write. He knows his Latin prayers. He can interpret the scriptures. To the villagers, he is both spiritual shepherd and practical guide. They come to him for confession, for counsel, for blessings. He baptizes their children, marries their young, prays for their dead. He teaches them the mysteries of faith, sometimes with stern warning, sometimes with gentle comfort. Yet priests are human too. Some are devoted, humble, and deeply caring. Others may be lax, more interested in collecting tithes than tending souls. Still, whether loved or resented, the priest embodies the connection between heaven and earth, and his presence cannot be ignored. The tithe, the tenth of the villagers, produces owed to the church. Grain, livestock, eggs, wool, all must be offered. For the church is not only a spiritual center but an institution of wealth. Its stores feed the priest, maintain the church, and often support the poor. Some peasants grumble, for the tithe is heavy when harvests are poor. But to neglect it risks not only earthly punishment but spiritual peril. To give to the church is to give to God. Beyond worship, the church also brings learning. In a world where few can read, the priest and sometimes the village clerk hold precious knowledge. They write records of births and deaths. They keep accounts. They may even teach letters to the children of wealthier peasants. The church preserves stories of saints, legends of holy men and women who inspire and guide. Its sermons weave moral lessons into tales of Christ and the apostles. Through these, even the simplest villager learns what it means to live a Christian life. The churchyard, too, plays its part. It is both burial ground and gathering place. Here neighbors speak after Mass, children play among the gravestones, and elders sit in the sun. Life and death mingle in the shadow of the church tower, reminding all that this world is fleeting, but eternity awaits. Religion also stretches into the very work of the fields. Before sowing, the priest blesses the seed. At harvest, thanks are given for the bounty of the earth. Holy days interrupt labor, for to work on them is a sin. Saints' days mark the calendar as surely as the seasons. A villager's year is not simply divided by plowing and reaping, but by Lent and Advent, by Michaelmas and All Saints' Day. Time itself belongs to God. Even the smallest moments carry a thread of devotion. A peasant crossing his field may pause to trace the sign of the cross. A mother may whisper a prayer over her child's cradle. A blacksmith may invoke St. Dunstan before striking iron. A shepherd may pray to St. Cuthbert as he tends his flock. Life is interwoven with faith, until the two cannot be separated. The church also teaches fear, the fear of sin, of damnation, of purgatory's fires. Tales of judgment remind the villagers that every deed, every thought, will one day be weighed. The images on the church wall, the stern words of the priest, the tolling of the funeral bell, press the reality of death and afterlife upon their minds. Yet with fear comes hope, the promise of forgiveness, of paradise, of eternal rest in the company of saints. This balance of dread and consolation shapes the very character of medieval life. And in the church's festivals, in its rituals and processions, there is also joy. At Christmas, candles blaze as the story of Christ's birth is retold. At Easter, flowers fill the church, and bells ring in triumph. At the feast of the village saint, the whole community walks in procession, banners held high, singing hymns as they circle the fields, asking for blessing and protection. These are not only holy acts, they are also moments of community, when lord and peasant, priest and child, all stand side by side beneath the shadow of the cross. As evening falls, the bell tolls again, calling the faithful to prayer. The villagers kneel, the priest chants, the candles flicker. Outside, the fields lie quiet, the cottages glow with firelight, and above them, rising into the dusk, the church tower watches, steadfast and eternal. It is more than stone and timber. It is the heartbeat of the village, the link between earth and heaven, the reminder that in this fragile world of toil and hardship, there lies a greater promise. Thus, the church weaves itself through every thread of medieval life. It blesses the newborn, guides the living, buries the dead. It demands tithes, but offers comfort. It warns of sin, but promises grace. It binds the people together in ritual, in tradition, in hope. In the life of a medieval English village, the church is not merely a building, it is the very air they breathe, the compass by which they live, the anchor that holds them steady against the storms of time. Work in fields and farming life, the village may rest at night in its cottages and gather by day in its church, but its true heartbeat lies here, in the open fields, stretching as far as the eye can see. These fields are not fenced into tidy farms as we might imagine today. Instead, they are divided into long, narrow strips, scattered and shared among the villagers. It is here, upon these strips of earth, that the great majority of life is spent. From the sowing of seed to the gathering of harvest, the fields rule the villager's days, his health, his hopes, and his very survival. Step out with me into the early morning. The air is cool, the grass wet with dew, and already the peasants are at work. Men and women move across the fields, their shapes bent against the horizon, their tools clinking in steady rhythm. Children trail behind, some carrying water, some chasing away birds, some simply tumbling in the furrows while their parents labor. Even the smallest child soon learns that the land demands hands, and all must play their part. The year in the fields begins with plowing. The soil, heavy and stubborn in England's damp climate, is broken open by the great wooden plow, its iron-tipped blade slicing into the earth. The plow is drawn by oxen, slow but strong, their hooves squelching in the mud as the driver urges them forward. It is back-breaking work, for the plow must be guided carefully, held steady through soil that resists with every stone and root. Men strain, oxen heave, mud clings to boots and hands, yet without this first labor, no seed can grow. Once the furrows are carved, it is time for sowing. The sower strides steadily across the field, carrying a sack of seed slung over his shoulder. With a practiced swing of his arm, he scatters grain into the furrows, trusting the earth to receive it. Behind him, others follow, covering the seed lightly with soil. It is a task of faith as much as skill. Too little rain, and the seed withers. Too much, and it rots. Birds swoop eagerly, stealing what they can. Chased by boys with sticks, Yet each scattering of seed carries the hope of bread to come. The crops are varied but simple. The mainstay is grain wheat, barley, rye, and oats, the foundation of bread and ale. Alongside grow peas and beans, cabbages and onions, leeks and turnips. These provide what nourishment the peasant table can afford. The fields are often divided into a three-field system, one planted with wheat or rye, another with barley or legumes, and a third left fallow, resting and renewing its strength. This rotation guards the soil against exhaustion, though it means that at any given time, part of the land lies idle. Through spring and summer, the peasants weed and tend the crops. They stoop for hours in the sun, pulling thistles and nettles, breaking clods of earth, watching for signs of blight or pest. There are no sprays, no machines, only sharp eyes, rough hands, and endless labor. Yet still, the threat of hunger lingers. A sudden storm, a swarm of locusts, a creeping rot, any of these may lay waste to the year's hopes. The people know this well, and each time the church bell rings for a rogation procession, they walk the fields in prayer, begging God's blessing upon the growing grain. When the summer ripens into harvest, the village enters its most crucial season. From dawn until dusk, men and women cut the grain with sickles, stooping low, their backs aching, their hands raw. Children gather the sheaves, tying them into bundles. Carts creak under the weight of the harvest, oxen straining as they drag loads toward the village. It is exhausting work, but there is a kind of joy in it, toothless satisfaction of gathering what is grown, of knowing that bread will be baked, ale brewed, and bellies filled through the winter. The Lord's domain, the fields kept for his own use, must be harvested first, and the peasants are bound to work there before tending their own strips. This duty can breed resentment, for a man's own grain may spoil while he labors in the Lord's fields. Yet it is the way of the manor, and none may shirk it without fine or punishment. Only when the Lord's grain is safely stored may the peasants turn to their own. The harvest is frantic, for every hour counts. Rain may ruin the cut sheaves, damp may rot them before they are dried. It is a race against weather, against time, against hunger itself. Once the grain is brought in, it must be threshed and winnowed. In the barn, men beat the sheaves with flails, striking rhythmically to break the kernels free. The chaff and straw fly about, covering clothes and skin with dust. Then, with wide baskets, the grain is tossed into the air, the wind carrying away the lighter husks, the heavier grain falling to the ground. It is tedious work, but vital. Only when the grain is clean and stored in bins or sacks is the harvest truly safe. Not all labor lies in the fields. Beyond the strips of grain stretch the meadows and pastures. Here, cattle graze, providing milk, meat, and hides. Sheep dot the hillsides, their wool is precious as their flesh. For wool is England's treasure, sold to merchants who carry it abroad. Pigs root in the woods, fattening on acorns and beech masts, their squeals echoing through the trees. Each family may keep a few animals, though the Lord's herds are largest. Tending them is daily work, milking cows at dawn, leading sheep to pasture, fetching water for horses, watching for wolves or thieves. The seasons shape every task. In winter, the fields lie bare, but the peasants are far from idle. They mend tools, weave baskets, spin wool, and prepare for the year to come. In spring, they plow and sow. In summer, they weed and tend. In autumn, they harvest and store. Each season brings its own labors, its own burdens. The cycle is unending, a wheel that turns with steady inevitability. To live in the village is to live by the rhythm of the earth. The work is harsh, unrelenting, and often dangerous. Backs ache, hands blister, accidents with scythes or oxen cripple and kill. Hunger stalks the weak years, when frost or flood destroy the crops. Yet amidst the toil, there is also community. Neighbors labor side by side, sharing tools, helping each other in need. At harvest, songs are sung as the grain is cut, laughter rising above the sweat. Work and fellowship are intertwined, for no family can endure alone. The fields are not only soil and seed, but the ground upon which human bonds are forged. Even the children play their part. A boy may drive the oxen as his father guides the plow. A girl may carry water to the men in the fields, or scare away birds with clapping hands. From their earliest years, children learn that the field is both burden and gift. It feeds them, clothes them, sustains them, but only if they give it their sweat and strength in return. The harvest festival, held after the last sheaf is cut, brings a rare moment of joy. A sheaf may be dressed as a figure, the corn dalion carried in procession to the church, an offering of thanks. Songs are sung, ale flows, bread is broken, in celebration. For a brief evening, the fear of hunger is set aside, and the villagers rejoice in the bounty of the earth. Yet the shadow always lingers. A poor harvest means hunger, even starvation. Bread may be stretched with peas or beans, ale brewed weaker, meat almost never seen. In the worst years, villagers eat acorns, roots, or even bark. Disease follows hunger, striking down the weak. It is a reminder that life in the fields, though the source of all, is also precarious. The earth gives, but it also withholds. Still, without the fields, there is no village. The manor may command, the church may guide, the cottages may shelter, but it is the soil that sustains all. Each furrow plowed, each seed sown, Each sheaf gathered binds the people to the land. Their backs may ache, their bellies may growl, but they know no other life, no other sustenance. And so the villagers rise with the dawn, take up their tools, and step once more into the furrows. The oxen plod, the sickles flash, the grain bends and falls. Season after season, year after year, the cycle repeats. The fields demand, and the villagers answer. In their labor lies their hardship, their survival, and their enduring bond with the earth itself. The harvest has been gathered, the grain threshed and stored, and now, within the cottages of the medieval English village, we may pause to consider what sustains the body day by day. Food. It is in the kitchen corner, by the hearth's fire, that the rhythm of life turns into bread, porridge, and broth. The meals may seem humble to us now, but in them lies both the hardship and the comfort of the villager's existence. Let us step into a cottage at dawn. The fire has been coaxed awake from yesterday's embers, its faint orange glow pushing back the morning chill. A pot hangs over the flames, the smell of pottage a thick, bubbling stew already filling the air. This pottage is no delicacy but the mainstay of the peasant diet. Grains, peas, beans, and whatever vegetables are at hand, leeks, onions, carrots, or cabbage are simmered together, thickened, and salted if salt can be spared. Sometimes a scrap of meat or a bone is added for flavor, though such additions are rare. Day after day, year after year, pottage is eaten, each bowl slightly different, but always the same. Beside it lies the bread. Bread is more than food, here it is survival itself. From the finest white wheat loaves baked for the Lord's table, to the coarse, dark loaves of rye and barley eaten by peasants, bread is the daily anchor. The villagers' loaves are heavy, dense, and sometimes stretched with beans, peas, or even ground acorns in lean years. Freshly baked bread, torn and dipped into hot pottage, is the villager's comfort, a simple ritual that binds one day to the next. And then there is ale. Water is not always safe to drink, drawn from streams that may be fouled by livestock or waste. So ale is brewed mild, low in alcohol, but safe and nourishing. It is drunk by men, women, and children alike, not in excess, but as a daily drink. Brewing is often the work of women, and each household may have its own batch, simmering, the scent of malt filling the air. The ale is not clear and frothy as in modern times, but thick and cloudy, almost like liquid bread. Now let us look more closely at what fills the villager's diet. Meat is a rarity for peasants. The Lord may feast upon venison from the forest, or roast beef and pork from his herds, but such luxuries rarely reach the peasant table. At best, a family may eat pork from a pig they fattened through the summer, slaughtered at Martinmas in November to last the winter. The meat is salted, smoked, or dried to preserve it, for fresh meat spoils quickly. Perhaps once or twice a week, a small portion is added to pottage, a treasured flavor amidst the vegetables. Fish, however, is more common, especially for those near rivers or streams. Eels, carp, trout, and perch may be caught, salted, or smoked. Fish is also tied to the church calendar. On Fridays and during Lent, meat is forbidden, so fish becomes the substitute. In coastal villages, salted herring or dried cod might appear in trade, though such things are precious. Cheese and dairy also play their part. Cows and goats provide milk, but fresh milk spoils quickly, so it is turned into butter or cheese. Soft cheeses may be eaten soon. Harder cheese is stored for leaner months. Butter is a prized fat, spread upon bread or melted into pot. Eggs, gathered from hens or ducks, add variety, though hens often lay only in warmer months, leaving winters sparse. Vegetables and legumes form the backbone of daily meals. Peas, beans, and lentils are boiled until soft, thickening the stew. Leeks, onions, garlic, and cabbage are staples, growing readily in cottage gardens. Turnips and carrots add sweetness, while herbs, parsley, sage, thyme flavor the pot when available. These humble plants, grown beside the door or in small plots, are the villager's treasure, making the difference between bland survival and a meal with some comfort. Fruit is a seasonal gift. In summer, berries are gathered from hedgerows, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. In autumn, apples and pears are harvested, eaten fresh or dried for storage. Nuts, 2 hazelnuts, chestnuts, walnuts are gathered and stored. Honey, taken from hives or found wild, is the sweetener of choice, precious, and rare. Sugar is unknown to most villagers, a luxury of faraway trade. Grains dominate all. Wheat for bread, oats for porridge, barley for ale, rye for coarse loaves. Oats especially are a peasant friend, boiled into thick porridge, eaten at morning or night. A bowl of warm oats may be all that stands between hunger and strength on a cold winter-s day. But meals are not only about ingredients, they are about ritual and sharing. The family gathers around the hearth, sitting on stools or the floor, a single pot shared by all. Bread may be broken and passed, pottage ladled out. There are no forks, only spoons and knives, and often hands. Meals are quick, practical, and quiet, though stories may be told, prayers murmured, and children hushed. For the peasants, food is fuel for labor, not ceremony. Feasting, however, is another matter. On holy days, at harvest, or at weddings, the table may suddenly overflow. Bread and ale are plentiful, pottage is enriched with meat, pies may appear, and sweet dishes flavored with honey or dried fruit are savored. On such days, the villagers taste abundance, and laughter fills the cottage. These moments remind them that life is not only toil and hunger, but also celebration and plenty, though fleeting. In the Lord's hall, food tells another story. While peasants eat coarse bread and pottage, the Lord and his household dine on roasted meats, rich sauces, fine pastries, and imported spices. The smells from the manor kitchen may drift across the fields, a reminder of the gulf between classes. And yet, at times of great feast, Christmas, Easter, or weddings, the Lord may share with his tenants, granting them food from his table as a sign of generosity. For a villager, to taste roast venison or a spiced pie is a rare wonder, remembered for months. Cooking itself is simple, yet skilled. The hearth fire must be tended constantly, its heat judged by eye and hand. Pots hang on iron hooks or rest upon stones. Bread is baked in communal ovens or upon heated stones, and meat, when there is any ease, roasted on spits. Smoke fills the cottage, for chimneys are rare, staining rafters black. The house smells always of wood smoke, herbs, and boiling broth. Salt is precious, for it preserves meat and flavors food. It must often be purchased, sometimes carried from faraway coasts, making it costly. Herbs from the garden, or wild plants gathered in hedgerows, add what flavor they can. Food may be bland by our tastes, but to the villagers, each meal is nourishment, survival, and comfort. We must not forget the hunger years. In times of poor harvest, the diet turns harsh. Bread is stretched with beans, peas, or worse, ground bark, acorns, or whatever filler may stave off starvation. Pottage grows thin, vegetables scarce. Bellies ache, strength fades, and disease spreads more easily. In such years, the difference between life and death may be a neighbor's generosity, a lord's charity, or sheer endurance. Yet when harvests are good, the village eats well in its way. The rhythm of meals, bread, ale, pottage, and sometimes meat or fish, creates a steady hum of life. Children grow, men labor, women tend hearth and garden. Food binds them together, sustains them through labor, and gives them the strength to face the endless cycle of the seasons. Food, diet, and cooking in the village. As night falls, the cottage grows quiet. The fire burns low, the pot has been emptied, and tomorrow's meal already waits in thought. The villagers sleep with the smell of smoke and grain lingering in their nostrils, dreaming of fields, harvests, and bread. For in the medieval English village, food is not only a necessity, but the heart of existence, a humble feast that marks each day, each season, and each fragile year. Clothes, appearance, and daily comforts. When we imagine the people of a medieval English village, it is easy to picture them as shadowy figures bent over their work, half lost to time. Yet each man, woman, and child had their own face, their own dress, their own manner of presenting themselves to the world. Clothes were more than coverings, they were shields against the cold, marks of class, and even statements of modest pride. To understand the villagers' daily life, we must step inside their cottages once more, and look at the garments they wore, the ways they cared for themselves, and the small comforts they found amidst their hardships. Let us begin with the simplest truth. Clothing was precious. For a peasant family, garments were few, often only 1 or 2 sets per person, worn daily until they grew thin and patched. Unlike our world of overflowing wardrobes, the villagers' clothes were hard-earned, made from materials they grew, spun, and stitched themselves. To own more than the bare necessities was rare, and a sign of relative wealth. The fibers of clothing began in the fields and meadows. Wool was the most common material. Sheep grazed upon the village pastures, their fleeces shorn in late spring. The wool was washed, carded, spun into yarn, and woven into cloth. Coarse wool became the everyday fabric of the peasant, warm and durable, though sometimes itchy. Finer grades of wool, softer and dyed in rich colors, were worn by those who could afford them, the lord's household, prosperous merchants, or wealthy churchmen. Linen was another staple, woven from the stalks of flax, lighter and cooler than wool. It served for undergarments and summer wear. A peasant might own a simple linen shirt or shift, worn beneath heavier outer garments. For the wealthy, fine linen shirts and veils signified both comfort and refinement. Leather, too, was put to use. Tanned hides became shoes, belts, or caps. Fur, though rarer, provided warmth in the coldest months, sewn into cloaks or lining hoods. But silks and velvets, brought by distant trade routes, were far beyond the reach of common folk. Those belonged only to the nobility, their sheen, a reminder of the distance between manor and village. Now, picture the clothing of the peasant man. His basic garment was the tunic, a long shirt of wool or linen, reaching to the knees, belted at the waist with a simple rope or leather strap. Over this, he might wear a cloak in cold weather, fastened with a wooden or bronze brooch. His legs were covered with hose, sometimes in 2 separate pieces tied at the waist, or with loose trousers if hose could not be afforded. His feet were shod in leather shoes, simple in shape, often handmade at home or by the village cobbler. For heavy work, some might go barefoot, their feet hardened by the fields. The peasant woman dressed in equal simplicity. Her main garment was the kurtula, long dress of wool, worn over a linen shift. The kirtle might be laced or simply pulled over the head, belted at the waist for ease of movement. A woman often wore an apron for work, protecting her dress from soil and ash. Upon her head, modesty and custom required a covering, a veil, wimple, or simple cloth tied beneath the chin. Married women were expected to keep their hair covered, while girls might wear braids or simple headbands until wed. In winter, women wrapped themselves in woolen cloaks or shawls, keeping close to the hearth when the cold bit too deeply. Children's clothing was not so very different from their parents'. Boys wore tunics, sometimes shorter, with hose or simple leggings. Girls wore kirtles like their mothers, often passed down from older siblings. Clothes were cut to allow for growth, sleeves and hems let out as the child aged. It was not unusual for children to wear garments much too large, rolled or pinned until they grew into them. Colors were simple, but not absent. Many imagined peasants clothed only in dull browns, yet natural dyes offered more variety. Plant-based dyes gave shades of green, yellow, and soft blues. Browns and grays were common, but russet reds or muted blues could be found, depending on what plants and resources the village had. Bright, deep color scarlet, purple, rich blue were reserved for the wealthy, their expense beyond the villagers' reach. Clothing was mended and patched, not discarded. A tear in a tunic was sewn again, a cloak reinforced at the shoulders, hose patched at the knees. Women of the household were skilled with the needle, repairing garments endlessly. Nothing was wasted. Old clothes were cut down for children, scraps turned into patches or rags. A well-kept cloak might last many years, becoming threadbare only after countless winters. To appear with clean, mended clothing was a point of pride, even among those with little. Footwear deserves a moment's pause. Shoes were simple, leather-turned and stitched, tied with laces. They offered little protection compared to modern footwear, and so peasants often endured wet, cold feet in winter, or blistering heat in summer. Wealthier villagers or craftsmen might own sturdier boots, but many peasants went barefoot in summer months, saving shoes for winter or church. Personal appearance was shaped not only by clothing, but by grooming and hygiene. In truth, villagers bathed less frequently than we do today, yet they were not wholly unclean. Bathing was often done in rivers or streams during warm months, and washing hands and faces was a daily necessity. Hair was combed with wooden combs, and lice were a common nuisance. Soap, made from animal fat and lye, was harsh but serviceable. Men often kept their hair at moderate length, sometimes trimmed with knives or shears, while beards were worn according to custom or convenience. Women grew their hair long but kept it bound or covered. Jewelry was rare among peasants, but a simple brooch, wooden cross, or string of beads might be treasured. For the wealthy, rings, jeweled pins, and fine belts proclaimed status more loudly than words ever could. Daily comfort was meager. Imagine a winter's day, when the wind bites at the skin and the damp seeps into the bones. A peasant wraps himself in a woolen cloak, but still the chill lingers. Houses were drafty, with smoke filling the air, clothes often damp from weather. Yet the hearth provided warmth, and huddling near the fire, wrapped in cloaks and blankets, families found their rest. Sleeping garments were not separate night clothes, as we know them today. People often slept in their underclothes, or even fully dressed in winter, sharing warmth beneath woolen blankets or furs, if any could be had. Beds were stuffed with straw, sometimes covered by linen sheets, if fortune allowed, and cloaks or spare garments were piled on top for warmth. Despite hardship, villagers took pride in neatness. On Sundays, for church, the best garments were worn, tunics brushed, veils washed, shoes cleaned if possible. Even the poorest wished to appear decent before God and neighbor. Festivals and holy days brought out brighter colors. If a family had them, children dressed as finely as their parents could manage. Clothing was not mere necessity, but also a means of dignity. For those of higher station, the reeve, the bailiff, or the lord steward clothing was a marker of authority. A reeve might wear a finer cloak, dyed in stronger colors, setting him apart from ordinary villagers. In the manor hall, the lord and lady dazzled with fabrics far removed from village wool velvets, silks, furs, embroidered hems, and glittering brooches. Such displays reinforced the order of society, the villager clothed in coarse wool, the lord in velvet, each bound to their station by what they wore. Yet clothing also carried the warmth of memory and family. A cloak passed from father to son, a veil from mother to daughter, stitched and restitched across generations. Each garment told a story of work, of winters endured, of feast days remembered. Clothes were not only fabric, but history woven into thread. And so, when we picture the medieval English village, let us not see only the mud-stained tunic or the patched hose. Let us also see the pride in a freshly washed veil, the care in a mended cloak, the joy of a child dressed in colors for a festival. Clothes were few, comforts were small, but in them lay the villagers' effort to preserve dignity, warmth, and humanity against the roughness of their world. The fire flickers low, garments hang drying by the hearth, and the family settles into rest. Tomorrow the tunic will be pulled on again, the cloak fastened, the shoes laced. Day after day, season after season, the clothes endure, just as the people endure. In their patched wool and simple linen, the villagers carry their world upon their backs, threads of hardship, threads of resilience, woven into the fabric of medieval life. Childhood and children's lives in the village. When we think of childhood today, we often imagine toys, play, and carefree years before the duties of adulthood. But in a medieval English village, childhood was a shorter, harsher passage, threaded with laughter, yes, but also with labor, discipline, and the steady march toward responsibility. A child's world was bounded by the fields, the cottage, the church, and the manor ran from their earliest days. They were expected to learn their place within that world. Let us begin at the cradle. Babies were swaddled in long cloths, bound tightly so their tiny limbs would grow straight and strong. The swaddling bands kept them safe as mothers worked spinning, cooking, tending fields, or fetching water. Cradles rocked gently near the hearth, or infants were carried in slings while their mothers labored. The warm glow of the fire, the smell of pottage bubbling, the murmur of voices all formed the earliest memories of a child. Infant mortality was high. Many did not survive past their first year, lost to sickness, hunger, or accidents. Each birth was both a joy and a fear, a fragile hope for the family's future. Baptism came quickly after birth, often within days, for the church taught that a soul must be saved from limbo should death come too soon. The baptismal font was one of the first places a child entered outside the home, the priest's blessing marking them as part of both family and village. As toddlers, children began to toddle in the dirt outside their cottages, watched by older siblings as much as parents. Toys were simple sticks, pebbles, wooden dolls carved by fathers, or rag dolls sewn by mothers. A hoop rolled along the road, a ball made of leather scraps, a whistle cut from reed. Laughter rang out as children chased one another across fields or splashed in streams. Though life was harsh, childhood still held moments of delight, but play quickly blended into work. From as young as 4 or 5, children were given tasks. Boys might scare birds from crops, clapping and shouting to protect the seed. Girls might fetch water, gather firewood, or help tend younger siblings. Little hands carried small baskets of vegetables, fed chickens, or stirred pots. Work was not seen as punishment but as part of growing, a natural duty that bound the child to family survival. By the age of 7, childhood in the modern sense largely ended. A boy might be sent into the fields alongside his father, driving oxen or weeding. A girl would learn the arts of spinning, sewing, brewing, and cooking. Both boys and girls tended animals, milking cows, herding sheep, or feeding pigs. In some families, children were sent to work as servants in other households, especially by the age of 10 or 12. Wages were small, often paid in food and shelter rather than coin, but the experience prepared them for adult life. For the children of wealthier villagers, or for those marked by fortune, there was another path: schooling. The village priest or a nearby monastery might teach boys to read and write, though such opportunities were rare. Most peasant children remained illiterate, their knowledge carried instead in memory prayers recited by heart. Farming lore passed by word of mouth, songs and tales shared at the hearth. Girls especially had little chance at formal learning, their education rooted in the home and hearth. The seasons shaped childhood just as they shaped adult life. In summer, children rose early with the sun, running barefoot in the dust, helping in haymaking, gathering berries from hedgerows. In autumn, they carried sheaves during harvest, gathered nuts, and helped store food. Winter brought long nights by the fire, spinning wool, telling stories, and playing simple games indoors. Spring saw children helping to sow and weed, chasing lambs, or splashing in muddy fields. Each season taught lessons in labor, patience, and endurance. Games, though simple, filled the spaces between tasks. Wrestling, running, blind man's buff, and tag were common, played on the village green. Boys carved toy swords and practiced mock fights, dreaming of knights and battles, though few would ever rise beyond the plow. Girls played house with dolls or made garlands of flowers in summer. Animals, too, became companions: dogs, cats, or even a favorite lamb. The world was their playground, but always shadowed by the work that awaited. Childhood was also shaped by faith. Children learned prayers from their mothers, repeating the Our Father and Hail Mary until they could recite them without thought. They attended Mass, stood beside their parents in the church, watched the flickering candles, smelled the incense, and listened to Latin words they could not yet understand. Saints' days and festivals punctuated their year with joy bonfires at midsummer, feasts at Christmas, dances on May Day. These moments of celebration were as much for children as adults, memories carried through their lives. Discipline was strict. Parents believed in correction, often physical, to train obedience. The rod or switch was used when necessary, and children were expected to show respect to elders and authority. Idleness was frowned upon. Laziness was seen as dangerous both to body and soul. Yet alongside sternness, there was affection. Mothers cradled their children, fathers shared stories, siblings played together. The bonds of family were deep, for in a world of uncertainty, Family was the greatest shield. Illness, however, loomed constantly. Childhood diseases we consider minor to damsels, whooping cough, or fevers could prove fatal. Accidents in fields or near hearths took lives suddenly. Malnutrition weakened many, stunting growth. It was a rare child who grew tall and strong without hardship. Yet those who did survive carried a resilience, shaped from earliest days by struggle and endurance. By the age of 12 or so, children were no longer seen as children in the village sense. Boys became young men, expected to work full days in the fields, perhaps apprenticed to craftsmen if fortune allowed. Girls became young women, learning to manage households, prepare dowries, and soon to marry. Childhood was short, a stepping stone into the duties of adulthood. Life demanded strength too quickly, leaving little room for lingering innocence. Still, within these brief years, joy and wonder bloomed. A child's laughter chasing a hoop down the lane, the pride of helping bring in the harvest, the warmth of a mother's embrace by the hearth. These moments glowed amidst the hardships. Childhood in a medieval village was fragile, fleeting, and often harsh. But it was also marked by play, by learning, and by the simple happiness of belonging to family and community. And so, as we picture the medieval village, let us not imagine only weary laborers and stern priests. Let us see also the children barefoot in the fields, running along muddy lanes, playing at nights with wooden swords, carrying baskets of eggs with careful steps. Their lives were not easy, but they were lives filled with growth, with discovery, and with the first shaping of souls who would one day tend the fields, spin the wool, and guide the next generation. Childhood here was not a separate world, but a beginning, woven tightly into the life of the village itself. Women's lives and duties in the village. In the heart of every medieval English village, women's lives formed the steady rhythm of survival. Their hands spun the wool, baked the bread, carried the water, tended the children, and worked the fields. Without their labor, the village itself could not endure. And yet, much of their world unfolded quietly within the cottage walls, by the smoky hearth, or in the green lanes of the village. To understand the medieval village, one must walk for a while in the shoes of its women. Let us begin with the dawn of the day. Before the rooster's crow had faded, women were often already awake. The hearth, darkened overnight, had to be rekindled. A spark struck from flint, a whisper of smoke, the glow of embers coaxed back to life. This was the first task. A warm fire meant breakfast for the family, warmth for the cottage, and flame for the day's work. Pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, might simmer slowly while women turned to their many other duties. Household work was unending. Women swept dirt floors, repaired clothing, patched thatch, and mended tools. They spun wool into yarn, using spindles and wheels, and then wove cloth for garments and bedding. Spinning was not merely a task, but a symbol of womanhood. The distaff and spindle were as closely tied to women as the plow was to men. The hum of spinning was a constant sound, weaving threads that would clothe the family through bitter winters. Food preparation filled the hours. Bread was the staple, but baking was not always done at home. Some villages had communal ovens, and women would carry dough to be baked, often for a small fee to the oven's keeper. Brewing ale, however, was a regular part of women's work. Ale was the common drink, safer than water, and sustaining for laborers. Women brewed small ale for daily use, and stronger ale for festivals, selling surplus to neighbors if they could. This practice gave rise to the alewives whose craft sustained households, and whose signs boughs of greenery hung above doors marked their trade. In addition to spinning and brewing, women tended gardens and animals. Small kitchen plots supplied cabbages, leeks, onions, and herbs. These gardens were vital, for the fields beyond the village provided grain, but it was women's gardens that flavored meals and brought variety to the table. Chickens scratched in the yard, goats or pigs rooted in pens, and sometimes a cow provided milk. Women milked animals, churned butter, and made cheese, everyday miracles that turned raw produce into nourishment. Childcare was ever present. Infants clung to their mothers or were swaddled near the hearth. Older children helped as soon as they could, but the youngest always needed attention. Mothers balanced babies on their hips while stirring pots, spinning wool, or even gleaning grain in the fields. Lullabies and prayers soothed the restless, while older daughters often stepped into the role of nursemaid for their younger siblings. Yet women's lives were not confined only to the home. In times of need, especially during harvest, women labored in the fields alongside men. They reaped, gleaned, carried sheaves, and stacked bundles. During haymaking, women raked and gathered grass for drying. These tasks were demanding, and though women might earn less than men for their labor, their contribution was indispensable. Without their presence in the fields, crops would not be gathered in time, and hunger would follow. The village economy relied heavily on women. Many engaged in small trades, selling eggs, butter, cheese, or woven goods. Some worked as midwives, tending to births with knowledge passed down through generations. Others worked as washerwomen, laundering clothes in the stream or river. These earnings, though modest, supplemented household survival. Widows especially relied on such work, for without a husband's plow or fields, their livelihoods depended on skill and perseverance. Marriage shaped much of a woman's destiny. Most girls wed in their teens, often by 16 or 17, though not always by choice. Marriages were arranged within the village or neighboring parishes, influenced by dowries, land, or simple necessity. A wife joined her husband's household, taking on the duties of managing his home, bearing his children, and ensuring the family's survival. Love was not always the foundation, though affection often grew with shared work and hardship. Widowhood, however, could bring both burden and independence. Widows were expected to continue working, but they could also manage their households in their own right. Some even ran businesses, inherited land, or became respected figures in the community. A widow's lot was not easy, but it sometimes gave a measure of freedom denied to younger wives. Faith bound women as tightly as men. Women prayed, attended Mass, and joined processions on saints' days. They lit candles to the Virgin Mary, patroness of mothers, and carried rosaries when they could. Many saw their own labor mirrored in the holy figures of women: Mary, at the manger, Martha in her service. The Church taught obedience, humility, and patience as women's virtues, yet women also found strength in these teachings, drawing resilience from their faith to endure hardships. Social life for women blossomed around communal tasks. At the well, women gathered to draw water, exchanging gossip and news as buckets splashed. At the oven, they waited together for bread to bake, sharing stories. On washing days, laughter echoed by the river as women scrubbed and rinsed. These moments of community broke the monotony of endless labor and bound women together in bonds of sisterhood. Festivals brought joy and release. On May Day, women wove garlands of flowers, danced around the maypole, and sang. At Christmas, they prepared feasts, roasted meats, and brewed ale, their tables filled with neighbors and kin. During harvest celebrations, they joined in songs of thanks, dancing with men in the village square. Though their days were long and weary, festivals reminded women that joy was part of life too. But life was not without danger. Childbirth was perilous. Many women died in labor, and nearly every woman knew of friends or kin lost to it. Midwives, skilled in herbs and remedies, eased the process, but survival was never assured. To bear children was both blessing and risk, the price of continuing family lines. Women's voices were often quiet in the official records of history, yet their presence was everywhere. They kept the hearth alive, the fields fed, the families clothed and nourished. Without their work, the medieval village would have collapsed into hunger and ruin. And though their labor was undervalued within the village itself, their role was respected, sometimes with affection, sometimes with stern expectation, but always with recognition of their necessity. As twilight fell, women's work did not end. The hearth fire was banked for the night, children tucked beneath woolen blankets, spinning left ready for the next day. Mothers whispered prayers over their families, asking for protection through the long dark. Their lives were cycles of labor, endurance, and devotion, circles as constant as the turning of the seasons. So, when we imagine a medieval village, let us not see only the men at the plows or the lords in the manor. Let us also see the women carrying water from the well at dawn, kneading bread with strong arms, spinning wool by firelight, soothing a child's cry, and laughing with neighbors at the washing place. Their lives were not easy, but they were full, and their strength held the village together. The story of the medieval English village is, in truth, as much the story of its women as of its men. In the rhythm of their daily lives, in their quiet endurance, in their shared laughter and tears, the heartbeat of the village can still be heard. The manor, the lord, and the peasant's obligations. When we speak of the medieval English village, we cannot separate it from the manor, the great structure of authority and obligation that shaped every life within the community. To live in a village was, in many ways, to live under the shadow of the manor house and its lord. The manor was not merely a building, it was the very system by which the land was governed, worked, and defended. And within this system, peasants carried duties that stretched across their days and even their generations. Let us begin by picturing the manor itself. At its heart was often the manor house or hall, the residence of the lord or his steward. Some manor houses were modest timber-framed halls with thatched roofs, surrounded by barns and stables. Others, especially in wealthier areas, grew into fortified stone structures, precursors to castles. Around them might be fish ponds, dovecotes, or orchards, all signs of privilege and authority. To the villagers, the manor stood as both protection and reminder. The land did not belong to them, but to the lord. The land of the manor was divided carefully. There was the domain land, which belonged directly to the lord and was farmed for his benefit. Then came the peasants' holdings, strips of land allocated to villagers for their families' use. Finally, there were common lands, where villagers grazed animals, gathered wood, or fish, though always under rules set by the manor court. Every field, meadow, and wood was accounted for, bound to the lord's authority. The peasants who lived on this land fell into different ranks. The villeins were the most common, bound to the land itself. They could not leave the manor without the lord's permission, nor could they marry freely, sell oxen, or pass property without consent. In return, they were granted strips of land to farm for their own families. Beneath them were the cotters and boarders, poorer peasants who held smaller plots, often with little more than a cottage and garden, working partly for themselves and partly for others. At the lowest rung were the serfs, who were considered unfreebound entirely to the manor, with almost no rights except what the lord allowed. Above all stood the lord himself. He might not live permanently in the village. Many lords had multiple manors, traveling between them or leaving their estates in the care of stewards. But whether present or absent, his authority was absolute. He held the land from a higher noble or even the king himself, and in return, he governed his peasants, collected rents, and ensured that his manor contributed to the greater feudal order. Life for the villagers was shaped by obligations to the lord. Chief among these were labor services. Villeins and serfs owed days of work each week on the lord's domain fields. This might mean plowing with heavy oxen, sowing seed, reaping crops, repairing fences, or carting produce. During harvest, extra work was required, often without pay, for the lord's fields had to be gathered before the peasants could return to their own. The rhythm of the manor was thus one of constant negotiation between serving the lord's needs and tending to one's own survival. Beyond labor, there were rents and dues. These might be paid in kind sheaves of grain, hens, eggs, or honey, or sometimes in coin, though money was scarce in rural villages. On special occasions, additional dues were expected. At Christmas, for example, peasants might owe hens or ale. When the lord's daughter married, villagers might contribute a merchat, a form of marriage payment. When a villager died, his heir often paid a heriot, a death duty of the best animal or item in the household. Such customs bound each life to the manor from birth to death. The lord also held rights of justice. The manor court was where disputes were settled, rules proclaimed, and fines imposed. Villagers were summoned to attend, sitting beneath the eye of the steward or bailiff, who spoke on behalf of the lord. Here, quarrels over land boundaries, theft, broken fences, or failure to perform duties were heard. A man who let his animals stray into a neighbor's field might be fined. A woman who brewed ale too weak or sold it without license might face censure. Attendance at court was itself an obligation. To ignore it risked penalty. Yet the lord was not only a figure of oppression, he also provided protection. In times of danger, raiders, bandits, or political unrest, the manor house or its fortifications offered refuge. The lord maintained order, ensured fields were cultivated, and defended the rights of his manor against outsiders. For many peasants, harsh though the obligations seemed, the manor was a shield as well as a burden. The relationship between lord and peasant was not entirely without humanity. Lords relied on their peasants for prosperity. Peasants relied on their lord for stability. Festivals, court gatherings, and feasts sometimes brought moments of shared community, however unequal. A wedding on the manor might see villagers feasting in the hall, music played, and ale flowing. Harvest celebrations often united lord and tenants in thanksgiving. In such moments, the divisions of rank blurred, if only briefly, reminding all that the land bound them together. Still, for the peasant, the weight of obligation was heavy. Imagine a villain in spring, summoned to plow the lord's domain. He rises before dawn, his own fields unsown, yet must yoke oxen for the lord. His wife tends the children, fetches water, and spins, while he labors on soil whose grain will never fill his family's pot. When evening comes, he turns to his own small strips, weary yet compelled, for hunger waits for no man. His life is a balancing act, serving the lord enough to meet obligations, yet finding enough strength to sustain his family. The manor also shaped inheritance and freedom. A villain could not freely leave his land. If he fled, he was considered a fugitive. Generations of families might live and die on the same strips of land, their names recorded in manor rolls. Freedom could sometimes be purchased if a villain saved enough coin. He might pay the lord to release him from servitude. Others gained freedom by marrying outside the manor, escaping in towns, or through royal decree. But for most, the cycle of obligation endured, binding father to son, mother to daughter. Within this structure, the church and the manor intertwined. The lord often granted land to the parish priest, and tithes the tenth of produce owed to the church had another layer of duty. A peasant family might thus owe grain to the lord, labor to the domain, hens for dues, and a portion of harvest to the priest, all before securing food for themselves. And yet, to fail in these duties risked punishment on earth and condemnation in the hereafter. Despite the hardships, the manor provided stability in uncertain times. In an age of wars, plagues, and famines, the manor was a structure that ensured the land was tilled, disputes were managed, and communities endured. It was not freedom, but it was survival. As evening settles over the village, one might picture the manor lord seated at his high table, served by stewards, his hall lit by fire and candle. Beyond his walls, peasants rest in their cottages, weary from a day of labor. Their lives may seem far removed, yet they are bound together, lord and villager, by the soil itself. For without the peasant's toil, the lord has no wealth. Without the lord's authority, the peasant has no protection. It is a web of duty and dependence, unequal but unbroken. And so, The manor stands as the very heart of medieval village life. It is a world of obligation and hierarchy, of rents and courts, of labor owed and rights granted. To live in a medieval village was to live within this structure, to measure one's days by its demands, and to pass one's life within its shadow. The manor, with its lord and its obligations, was not merely a backdrop, it was the stage upon which every life in the village played out. Crime, punishment, and village justice. When we think of justice today, we might picture courts of law, judges in robes, or lawyers debating in grand halls. But in the medieval English village, justice was far more immediate, far more local, and often far harsher. The manor and its court oversaw nearly every aspect of life's small quarrels, petty thefts, broken customs, even matters of morality. Crime and punishment in a village were not distant concepts. They were daily realities, woven into the fabric of community life. Let us begin in the manor court, the center of village justice. Held in the great hall, or sometimes in the open air, it was presided over by the lord steward or bailiff. Villagers gathered when summoned, their attendance an obligation. There was no avoiding it, for to ignore the summons was itself a punishable offense. The court was not a distant body. It was made up of neighbors and fellow villagers, bound by oath to witness and uphold the customs of the manor. The kinds of crimes and disputes brought before the court varied widely. Some were small matters, a broken fence that allowed animals to stray, a boundary dispute over strips of land, or an accusation of brewing ale too weak, or selling it without license. Others were more serious, stealing grain, taking wood from the lord's forest without permission, or failing to perform labor owed to the domain. There were also moral offenses, fighting, adultery, or spreading slander. In every case, the court sought to maintain order, not only for the lord's profit, but for the harmony of the community. Punishments were often monetary fines, though money was scarce. A villager fined for letting pigs wander into another's field might pay in hens, grain, or labor. Fines were a source of revenue for the lord and a constant reminder of authority. For the poor, even a small fine could be a heavy burden, forcing families to go without food or sell precious goods. For more serious offenses, punishments grew harsher. A thief might be placed in the stocks, seated with feet locked in wooden boards in the village square. They're exposed to weather and the ridicule of neighbors. Shame was as sharp as the physical discomfort. Others might be placed in the pillory, their heads and hands secured while villagers jeered, threw mud, or even pelted them with rotten food. These punishments were not hidden behind walls, they were public, meant to humiliate and warn others. Theft of greater value, violence, or repeated offenses could lead to corporal punishment. Whipping was common, carried out before the community. In some cases, the punishment was banishment from the village, a fate nearly as harsh as death. For survival outside the community was difficult. In the gravest cases, murder, arson, or treason, the penalty could be execution. Though such decisions were often passed up to higher courts beyond the manor, still, the village knew well the fear of gallows. For traveling justices sometimes brought that ultimate sentence even into rural places. Yet not all punishments were physical. The court also relied on oaths and pledges. A villager accused of wrongdoing might swear innocence on holy relics, or call neighbors to vouch for their honesty. If trusted men of the village, often 12 in number, swore an oath on one's behalf, it could outweigh accusation. In this way, justice relied not only on evidence, but on reputation and communal bonds. To be known as honest was as valuable as gold. The system of tithings and frank pledge reinforced this. Groups of 10 households were bound together, each responsible for the good behavior of the others. If one member broke the law, the others were expected to bring him to justice or face penalties themselves. This ensured that the community policed itself, for no one wished to bear the cost of another's crime. It also created a web of accountability, where neighbors watched neighbors. An order was maintained through collective responsibility. The church, too, held sway over justice. Moral offenses, adultery, failing to attend mass, or using foul language might be dealt with in the ecclesiastical courts. A sinner might be ordered to do penance, to fast, or to walk barefoot in procession. The church's punishments were spiritual, but they carried real weight. For to be excommunicated was to be cast out from both faith and community. Thus, villagers lived under two systems of justice, secular and sacred, both binding and inescapable. For women, justice could be especially harsh. Alewives who brewed poorly might be fined repeatedly. Women accused of quarreling too loudly with neighbors could face punishment in the cucking stool. A wooden chair lowered into water while the village watched and mocked. It was a cruel and humiliating spectacle, aimed at silencing women's voices. Yet it was not uncommon, for village life valued harmony, and sharp words were seen as dangerous as theft. Still, the manor court was not only about punishment, it also served as a record of life. Agreements of land, transfers of property, marriage arrangements all were noted there. Villagers swore loyalty, neighbors witnessed transactions, and disputes were resolved. In this sense, the court was not merely a place of fear, but the very heartbeat of the village's governance. Crime in the village was often born of necessity. Hunger drove theft of grain, wood, or livestock. Poverty led to disputes over gleaning rights or boundaries. Anger in cramped cottages erupted into fights. In such close-knit communities, every crime was known, every punishment seen, every lesson remembered. For most peasants, the fear of shame of standing in stocks before their neighbors was deterrent enough. Yet justice was not always fair. Lords and their officials wielded power, and bias was inevitable. A poor cotter might be punished severely for taking wood, while the lord's servant might escape censure for worse. Still, peasants endured, for the system, harsh though it was, kept order in a fragile world where survival depended on stability. Let us picture a day of justice. The villagers gather in the manor yard, called by the steward's voice. Names are read. A man is accused of failing to mend his fence. He nods and pays his fine. A woman is charged with selling ale without license. She protests, but accepts the penalty. A young man, caught stealing grain, stands before all, his shame heavy. He is sentenced to the stocks. The villagers watch, murmur, and then return to their fields. Justice has been done, and order restored for now. As night falls, the memory of punishments lingers. The stocks stand empty in the square, ready for the next offender. The Lord Steward records the fines, adding them to the manor's wealth. And in the cottages, parents remind their children, obey the customs, keep the peace, avoid trouble. For in the village, justice is not far away, but ever present, woven into the daily life of every man, woman, and child. Thus, crime and punishment in the medieval English village were not abstract concepts. They were lived experiences, part of the rhythm of existence. To survive meant to live within the law of the manor, to honor one's obligations, and to bear the consequences of failure. And though the punishments might seem cruel to us today, for the villagers they were the price of order, the cost of belonging to a world where every life was bound together by duty and by custom. The medieval village was, in truth, a place where justice was harsh, communal, and ever. It was a justice that reminded each villager, from the humblest cotter to the wealthiest villain, that they lived not only for themselves, but within a web of authority, responsibility, and consequence. Festivals, feasts, and celebrations in the village inn, the steady rhythm of medieval village life, days of toil in the fields, obligations to the manor, prayers at the parish church there were also moments of joy. The year was not only marked by work and hardship but by times of release, of laughter, of food and music, and gathering together. Festivals and feasts were the threads of color woven through the rough cloth of peasant life, and they carried meaning far beyond mere merriment. They were the times when the village became truly alive. To understand the celebrations of the medieval English village, we must first see how the calendar itself was sacred and seasonal. The church structured the year around holy days: Christmas, Easter, saints' feasts, while the agricultural cycle offered its own festivals. Planting in spring, harvest in autumn, and gatherings at midsummer. Between them, villagers found reason to pause from their labor and join in community celebration. Let us begin with Christmas, one of the most cherished times of the year. As winter darkened the countryside, the feast of Christ's birth brought warmth and joy. In the church, candles glowed brightly, hymns filled the cold air, and villagers gathered shoulder to shoulder, united by faith and festivity. In homes, greenery, holly, ivy, and mistletoe was brought inside to brighten the dark season. Feasting, though modest compared to the Lord's hall, filled cottages with cheer. A goose might be roasted, bread freshly baked, and ale brewed strong for the occasion. For a time, hunger and cold were forgotten, replaced by laughter and the closeness of kin. Then came Shrovetide, the days before Lent. Here was a time of play and indulgence before fasting began. Villagers confessed their sins to the priest, but also gathered in the lanes for games, merriment, and food. Pancakes were sometimes cooked, using up eggs and fat before the season of abstinence. Shrovetide was marked by energy ball games played in muddy fields, songs sung loudly, and neighbors enjoying the brief freedom before the somber days of Lent. Easter was a time of solemnity and joy. After weeks of fasting, villagers celebrated the resurrection with renewed feasting. Families wore their best garments to Mass, new clothes if they could be afforded, and shared meals afterward. Eggs, symbols of new life, were treasured and often painted or blessed. Children played games, rolling eggs down hills or hunting for hidden ones. For peasants, Easter was not only a religious high point but a promise of spring, of warmer days and new growth. The turning of the seasons was celebrated too. May Day brought garlands of flowers, ribbons, and dancing around the maypole. Young men and women joined hands in dance, laughter filling the village green. May Day was filled with symbols of fertility and new life. Greenery gathered from the woods, bonfires lit, and songs sung to welcome summer. It was a time of courtship as well, for young couples often found romance beneath the May blossoms. Midsummer, celebrated around the feast of St. John, was marked with great bonfires. Flames leaped into the night sky, driving away evil spirits and blessing the fields for the coming harvest. Villagers leaped over the fires for luck, or walked around them in procession. The air was filled with music pipes, drums, fiddles, and the smell of roasting meat, shared by all who could afford it. In a time when winter's hardships still lingered in memory, midsummer was a moment of abundance and hope, but perhaps no festival was more vital to the peasant than the harvest feast. After months of toil in the fields, the grain gathered, and the barns filled, the village came together in thanksgiving. A special loaf of bread, often made from the first or last sheaf of wheat, was offered to the church in blessing. Then came the celebration. Ale flowed. Tables were laid with bread, cheese, roasted meats, and pies. Musicians played, and the villagers danced late into the night. The harvest feast was not merely celebration, it was relief. For survival through the coming winter depended on the bounty just gathered. In addition to these great feasts, the village calendar was dotted with saints' days and local festivals. Each parish had its patron saint, and on that saint's day, the villagers processed to the church, bearing candles, banners, and sometimes relics. After Mass, there might be games, markets, or wrestling contests. For the young, such days brought excitement, a break from routine, and a chance to see neighbors from surrounding villages. And let us not forget the role of the Lord and manor in these festivities. At times, the Lord might host a feast in the manor hall, inviting villagers to share in his bounty. Ale and bread were distributed, music filled the great chamber, and for one evening, peasants sat in the glow of the Lord's generosity. At weddings of noble daughters or at the birth of heirs, such largesse was extended. Though rare, these moments left memories that villagers carried for years. Food and drink were central to every celebration. Ale was brewed strong, mead sometimes shared, and wine appeared in the Lord's hall. Meat, scarce in daily life, was more plentiful at feast. Roast goose, pork, or even venison, if the Lord granted it. Pies filled with meat or fruit, cheese, wheels, and sweet treats of honey and nuts made appearances. Two peasants used to thin pottage and coarse bread. Such abundance was as joyous as the music and dance. Music itself was vital. The village might have fiddlers, drummers, or pipers, men and women whose skill brought life to the celebrations. Ballads were sung, dances performed in circles or lines, children clapped along, couples courted through dance, and elders watched with smiles. In music and movement, the hardships of daily life melted away, replaced by joy. Games added their share of merriment. Wrestling contests tested strength, archery games skill, and foot races speed. Children played tag or rolled hoops, while adults wagered on contests. At times, village games grew wild. Shrovetide football, for example, was a rough-and-tumble affair played with no fixed rules, more brawl than sport. But laughter and excitement bound the community together, and the memories of such games lasted through long winters. Festivals also carried rituals of belief and superstition. Bonfires were lit to ward off evil, herbs were gathered on Midsummer's Eve for healing, and charms were spoken to bless crops. The church frowned at times on these practices, yet many endured, woven into the fabric of rural faith. For villagers, the sacred and the seasonal were not separate but entwined, each reinforcing the other. For women, festivals were times of both work and joy. They brewed ale in larger quantities, prepared feasts, and sewed garlands of flowers. But they also danced, sang, and courted, their roles shifting for a time from laborers to settlers. For children, these days were pure wonder. The bright colors of ribbons, the warmth of bonfires, the taste of sweet cakes. Festivals were the highlights of youth, remembered long after adulthood dimmed the playfulness of life. Even in times of hardship, when harvests were poor, or sickness stalked, the village festivals were not abandoned. They might be smaller, more modest, but they endured. For in celebration lay resilience. To gather, to laugh, to feast, even in lean times, was to defy despair. Festivals reminded villagers that they were more than their work, more than their struggles. They were part of a community, sharing joy as well as labor. As evening settles over a festival day, the village green glows with firelight. Music drifts into the night. Children doze in their mothers' laps, and young couples slip away beneath the stars. The air smells of roasted meat and sweet ale, the laughter of friends mingling with the crackle of flames. For a brief time, the world feels whole, hardships forgotten, unity renewed. And so, festivals and feasts were far more than diversion. They were the heartbeat of the medieval village, the moments when life, faith, and community joined in harmony. They gave rhythm to the year, hope to the weary, and joy to the soul. Without them, village life would have been a great chain of labor. With them, it became a tapestry, woven with bright threads of laughter, song, and celebration. the shadow of war, plague, and famine in village life in a medieval English village. For all its moments of joy, simplicity, and community, was never free from shadow. The people who dwelt in cottages of wattle and daub, who tilled the fields and prayed in their parish church, lived always with a sense of fragility, for at any moment, forces beyond their control could sweep through their lives, war, disease, or famine, changing everything they knew. To understand the true rhythm of medieval existence, we must not only picture the green fields and festivals, but also confront these darker realities. Yet even here, in the midst of hardship, there is a story worth telling, a story of endurance, resilience, and faith. The shadow of war. Though many peasants lived their lives without traveling more than a few miles from their birthplace, the reach of war was never far away. England, through much of the Middle Ages, was a land touched by conflict. Barons quarreled with kings, neighbors fought over lands, and wars across the Channel pulled men from their plows into armies. In the 13th and 14th centuries, especially, the great shadow of the 100 Years' War with France loomed. While most villagers never saw the battlefields of Crécy or Agincourt, the effects of war rippled back to their quiet lanes. Lords called upon peasants to provide men-at-arms, or archers skilled with the longbow. A young man might be taken from his village, trained briefly, and sent overseas, often never to return. War also meant taxes and levies. Kings demanded money to fund their campaigns, and these costs filtered down through the feudal chain, landing heavily on villagers already struggling to feed themselves. Coins were scarce in peasant households, and when taxes rose, hunger often followed. At times, war came closer still. Bands of soldiers, disbanded or roaming, could descend upon villages, taking food, livestock, or valuables by force. In troubled times, cottages were burned, fields trampled, and lives shattered in an instant. For villagers, the clatter of hooves on a distant road could bring dread as much as curiosity, and yet, war was not only fear, it shaped village identity. Tales of archers from humble villages felling knights in shining armor traveled home, giving peasants a sense of pride. Songs were sung of victories, and stories told by returning soldiers, their lives forever altered by sights of distant lands. War, though cruel, was woven into the tapestry of their existence. The plague and disease of war was a shadow that came and went. Disease was a constant companion. The medieval village lived with sickness in many forms: fevers, stomach illnesses, infections from minor wounds, and the slow wasting of consumption. Medical knowledge was limited. Cures often more superstition than science, but nothing compares to the terror that arrived in the mid-14th century, the Black Death, between 1347 and 1351. It swept through Europe, and English villages were not spared. It came quietly at first, perhaps with a merchant's cart, a rat in the barn, a flea hidden in its fur. Then, swiftly, the sickness spread. Imagine the fear as neighbors fell ill: fever, swollen buboes, and death within days. Families were broken apart, cottages left empty, entire villages abandoned. In some parishes, half the population was lost. In others, even more, the church bells tolled endlessly, graves were dug hurriedly, and the familiar rhythm of life collapsed into silence and mourning. For survivors, the world seemed transformed. Laborers were fewer, giving some peasants leverage to demand better conditions from their lords. Whole fields lay untended, yet wages rose as workers grew scarce. Society shifted in subtle but lasting ways. But in the moment, what villagers felt most was grief. An empty place at the hearth, the stillness of a voice no longer heard, the fear that tomorrow might bring death to their own door. Other outbreaks followed. The plague returned again and again in later decades, less fierce but still deadly. Beyond plague, other diseases haunted village life: smallpox, leprosy, and childhood illnesses that claimed many young lives. Mothers and fathers knew too well the grief of burying children, their love tempered by the fragility of life, and yet, even in this shadow, faith endured. Villagers prayed to saints, lit candles, and carried charms, seeking protection. They told stories of holy men and women who cured the sick, and they leaned on the strength of their community. When one family faltered, neighbors shared food or comfort. In a world where sickness could strike without warning, solidarity and belief were the strongest remedies they had. The scourge of famine alongside war and disease stood another shadow: famine. The medieval peasant lived at the mercy of the seasons. A cold spring, too much rain, or a dry summer could mean poor harvests. And when harvests failed, hunger came swiftly. One of the most severe famines struck in the early 14th century, known as the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. Heavy rains ruined crops. Fields lay sodden, and grain rotted before it could be harvested. Livestock sickened and died in the damp. In many villages, people ate bark, roots, or even the flesh of horses and dogs to survive. Starvation was a cruel visitor, and the memory of these years lingered for generations. Even in less extreme times, the poor lived close to hunger. Between harvests came the hungry gap, the lean months of late spring and early summer, when the last year's stores ran low and the new crops were not yet ready. During these weeks, villagers tightened their belts, stretched thin pottage with herbs and water, and prayed for fair weather. Famine shaped not only bodies but spirits. It taught peasants humility before nature, dependence on one another, and deep gratitude when the harvest was good. To break bread after a season of hunger was a sacred act, one that bound communities in relief and thanksgiving. Living with the shadows, war, plague, and famine, these were not distant horrors, but familiar parts of the medieval villagers' world. They shaped how people thought, prayed, and told stories. Death was never far away, but neither was resilience. When war threatened, villagers banded together to protect their homes, hiding goods or helping neighbors rebuild what was lost. When plague struck, survivors leaned on faith in one another. When famine gnawed, they shared what little they had, knowing that tomorrow they might be the ones in need. Their world was precarious, yet it was also marked by extraordinary endurance. The very fact that villages survived, that communities endured generation after generation, speaks to the strength of ordinary people. In their cottages, fields, and churches, they carried forward not only their burdens but also their hopes. Reflections at Decoded. We picture the medieval English village at the close of such a hard day. The scene is quieter. The church bell may toll for the dead, smoke rises thinly from cottage chimneys, and weary faces are lit by firelight. Yet there is still laughter among children, still songs, sung softly, still prayers, whispered in hope. The shadows of war, plague, and famine could not erase the light of community. Instead, they deepened it, reminding villagers that life, however fragile, was to be cherished. Each moment of peace, each loaf of bread shared, each sunrise over the fields was a blessing. And so, while these shadows haunted the medieval village, they also gave shape to its resilience. From hardship was born a strength that carried people forward, and from suffering came a unity that bound them together. In this balance of darkness and light, we find the true heart of village life, fragile, yet enduring, burdened, yet unbroken. Nightfall in the village. The day in a medieval English village was long, and often hard. It began with the crow of the rooster, the tolling of the church bell, the first light stretching across the fields. It was filled with toil, plowing and sowing, tending animals, mending roofs, cooking meals, fetching water. Yet no matter how busy or burdensome, every day had its end. And so, as the sun sinks low in the western sky, we come to the final chapter of our journey. Nightfall in the village. The setting sun, the light fades slowly, casting the cottages in hues of gold, then red, then soft gray. Shadows lengthen across the strips of farmland, and the sound of labor diminishes. The clatter of tools is replaced by quieter noises, the bleating of sheep gathered to pens, the lowing of cattle, the bark of a dog calling its master home. Villagers return from the fields in small groups, their clothes stained with earth, their shoulders heavy with weariness. But there is also relief. The work of the day is done. Children skip ahead, eager for supper, while mothers carry baskets of herbs or firewood. The smoke from hearth fires rises more thickly now, filling the air with the comforting smell of peat, wood, and cooking pottage. Home at evening. Inside the cottages, the evening ritual begins. The fire in the central hearth is stirred, its embers coaxed into flame. Light flickers against rough wooden walls and the uneven beams of the thatched roof. The family gathers close. This fire is their warmth, their kitchen, their only lamp against the dark. Supper is simple but welcome. Perhaps a bowl of pottage thickened with barley, flavored with cabbage or leeks. On better nights, bread is shared, or a piece of cheese, or meat from a rabbit caught in the hedgerow. A jug of ale passes from hand to hand, each sip warming tired bodies. The meal is not hurried. After long hours of labor, there is a quiet pleasure in eating slowly, in speaking softly about the day's work, or plans for tomorrow. Children lean against their parents, listening, learning the rhythms of adult life. For a little while, hunger is eased, and the cottage is filled with the hum of togetherness. The quiet of the village outside, the village settles into stillness. The lanes are dark now, for there are no lamps to light the way, only the faint glow of moon and stars. Dogs curl up before doors, hens roost in their coops, and the fields beyond lie silent under the fading sky. The church tower looms as a steady sentinel. Its bell rung one final time to mark the close of day. The sound carries across the rooftops, a reminder of God's presence in the silence of night. Some villagers whisper prayers before sleep, crossing themselves and entrusting the dark hours to divine protection. In these quiet moments, the village feels almost timeless, suspended between one day and the next. Evening pastimes. Though weary, not all villagers fall immediately into sleep. Evening is a time for small joys. A fiddler may draw his bow across the strings, playing a simple tune that drifts through the open door. Neighbors gather for stories, tales of saints and heroes, or humorous anecdotes to lighten the mood. Children beg for old legends of fairies in the woods, or dragons slain by knights. Laughter rises softly in the night air. Others work with their hands by firelight. A mother mends a tear in a child's tunic. A father sharpens a tool for tomorrow's labor. Women spin wool or weave, their hands practiced in the dim light. These quiet tasks are part of life's rhythm, no less important than the work in the fields. Sometimes, there is singing, a lullaby to calm restless children, or a hymn remembered from Sunday Mass. The voices are untrained, rough perhaps, but heartfelt. In song, villagers find comfort, a reminder that even in hardship, beauty exists. The hearth is the heart of the medieval home. Around it, life revolves. Food is cooked, warmth is shared, stories are told. As night deepens, the fire burns lower, glowing softly. Families sit close, basking in its warmth before it is allowed to fade. In many cottages, the animals sleep nearby. Chickens cluck softly, a pig roots in its pen, perhaps even a cow stands tethered inside on cold nights. Their presence is practical extra warmth and protection from thieves, but it is also part of the villager's world, human and animal, together, enduring the same night. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, clinging to clothes, hair, and thatch. It is not unpleasant, for it is the smell of safety, of home, of survival. For villagers, the hearth fire is life itself, and its glow against the dark is as much a spiritual comfort as a physical one. The night sky, step outside for a moment, and the medieval night is vast and humbling. With no lamps to drown the sky in light, the stars shine with piercing clarity. The Milky Way stretches like a pale ribbon, and constellations mark the turning of the seasons. For villagers, the night sky is both wonder and fear. They know its patterns well: the rising of the moon, the course of Orion, the North Star guiding travelers. Yet they also see mystery there, signs of fate, omens whispered by priests or wise women. In the stillness, an owl calls from the woods, a fox slips across the lane, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The night belongs to such creatures, and villagers respect its power. Few wander far after dark, for to do so is to step into a world of spirits, thieves, and the unknown. The safety of the cottage, the glow of the hearth, is protection against what lies beyond. Bath, sleep, and rest at last. The time comes for sleep. Beds are simple straw mattresses, perhaps with a wool blanket or furs in the cold. Families often sleep close together, children nestled beside parents, everyone sharing warmth. Privacy is scarce, but intimacy is plenty. Before closing their eyes, many say a final prayer. "Now I lay me down to sleep" was not yet common, but its spirit lived in medieval hearts, a plea for safe rest, for protection from sickness, fire, or spirits of the night. Sleep was never taken for granted, for death came easily in these times, and every morning was a blessing renewed. As the cottage grows quiet, the only sounds are the crackle of dying embers, the sigh of wind through the thatch, the occasional murmur of a dreamer. The village, once alive with labor and noise, lies hushed beneath the watchful stars. Reflections in the dark nightfall in the medieval village was not only an ending but also a mirror. In the stillness, villagers thought of their lives of debts owed, of fields sown, of children growing before their eyes. They remembered those lost to plague, war, or hunger, and they dreamed of better days to come. In this quiet, faith was strongest. For all the hardship, villagers believed they were part of a divine order, their suffering and joys alike held in God's hand. To rise with the dawn, to labor, to pray, and to sleep again at night, was to live as generations had before and as generations would after. And so, night after night, the cycle continued. A rhythm older than memory, steady as the tolling of the church bell, the eternal village. As we leave the medieval village, we see it resting under the stars, fields hushed, cottages glowing faintly, lives folded into rest. It is fragile, yes, but enduring. For though centuries have passed, though the cottages have crumbled and the villagers are long gone, their world still speaks to us. It reminds us of the resilience of ordinary people, of the strength found in family, in community, in simple rituals of work and rest, of the beauty in the ordinary, the flicker of a hearth fire, the sound of a lullaby, the comfort of bread shared at supper. Nightfall in the village is not only the close of a day, but the symbol of a life well lived. However modest, however hard, it is a reminder that in the darkest hours, there is always the promise of dawn. And so, we let the village rest. The people sleep in their cottages, the animals doze in their pens, the fields lie waiting for tomorrow's sun. The church bell will ring again, the rooster will crow, and life will begin anew. For now, in this moment, all is still, all is at peace. And so, our journey through the medieval English village comes to its close. We have walked its fields, sat by its hearths, shared its festivals, and faced its hardships. We have seen the rhythm of life from the crow of the morning rooster to the stillness of nightfall. Though centuries have passed, these lives remind us of the beauty of simplicity, of resilience, and of the bonds of community. Their days were hard, their joys modest, yet in their stories we find peace, and in their rhythm we find rest. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If this story has brought you comfort, I warmly invite you to subscribe to Go to Sleep Historian, where more journeys into the past await, to guide you into calm and restful nights. For now, close your eyes, let the silence of the medieval village linger, and drift gently into sleep. Good night.